So we're now on the 6th floor of the building, which, with typically strange nomenclature, is level 4. And this is a good place to get a sense of the actual physical building itself. The building in the far distance with the blue glass and the W turning on top of it, that's what is left of the original Woodward's department store. And to the left, you see one of the residential buildings, and then the building that looks a lot like the Flatiron building that has the brown metal on it. So the Flatiron building one is entirely market housing. The next one to the right is a combination of market housing with some family subsidized housing. The blue building, the Heritage building, is a lot of city offices with a daycare and so on. And then the building that we're in, the physical building we're in, is actually everything you see from this vantage point to the right. In fact, if you look down at the courtyard below, when we were underground on B2 and walking around the backstage, we were actually almost out as far as that drain strip where the fellow was sitting in the wheelchair with the green shirt. So there's a whole chunk of the bottom level that's underground. Our building itself does not include the angled structure on the top. That's a single residence housing apartment complex that is actually on our ceiling. And then from here, you don't see the London Drugs, but it's actually tucked in below and beyond what you see of our building, the courtyard. So one of the interesting things that happened in the development of this building was that we had a whole schematic design for the building based on it being a rectangular building. And in the summer after that was developed, the senior planner for the city of Vancouver said it had to be changed because it was blocking a view corridor. And in a rather remarkable design charrette, in literally one afternoon, we reworked the building so that it meets this layout here. So it went from being almost rectangular like this to this truncated 5-sided structure here. And in a very real sense, that gave us a second chance to rework things, and some very substantial things changed. It was almost it was pretty shocking when it happened, but it was actually pretty productive. Okay, so what you're looking at here then is the 6th floor. And this is, for the most part, a teaching floor. Everything else in the building is shared space between teaching programs and public spaces, if it's not small rooms that are offices for faculty or technical rooms or grad spaces or something like that. But the large spaces, other than this floor, are almost all shared. They're public venues sometimes, they're teaching spaces sometimes. Sometimes they're teaching public spaces. So we'll just do a quick once around on this, and just want to point out this space here, which is when you take a lot of rectangular spaces and have to reorient them, you end up with some what I think of as leftover spaces, and then you have to figure out what you're going to do with them. And in this case, the space ended up being a kind of intriguing shape. It's used largely for meetings, classes that are like seminar classes, fairly sizable, and it has, you know, a significant level of technology built into it. It also has some quite ironic things from my point of view. It has this grid, which is almost never really used, but one of the most wonderful things in the building you don't see unless you know it's there. So up here on the ceiling is an incredible number of AC outlets. And the best theory I have about why they are there is that they're an artifact of computer-aided design, where somebody laid out a grid of outlets, which now currently exists on the ceiling up above us, and then shoved them off to the side of the drawing, and they ended up getting printed and bid on and installed because there's no other really good reason why they would be there. Who knows? One of the deliberate design goals in the development of this building was to mix it up so that the different disciplines, the students in the different disciplines particularly, were forced to interact. It's like a physical expression of the concepts that are behind the creation of the School for Contemporary Arts. And there are a series of interesting facilities. So here is the smallest of the dance studios. If you stick your foot there, so this is the one of three actual dance studios. It has the only one that doesn't have any windows. The students have always called it maple or blonde because it has actually got a traditional wooden dance floor, and that was important to the people deciding what it should have. And then after that, it turned out to be too restricting, so it's been covered for years. The wooden floor, that is, has been covered for years with a portable vinyl dance floor, but they still call it the blonde, even though it's black. And then I'll let Vlad out here. And there are two other dance studios, but let me just show you this one, only this one, because it has a very interesting characteristic that or feature that will become clearer later on. So this is known as Courtyard for the reason that it's near the courtyard. Quite a sizable studio, and you know, it's quite a great studio. Each of these studios now has a dance floor that is a surface that is a ballet floor called a harlequin floor. But it's a kind of in the same way that the black Marley floor, that's traditional, the black vinyl dance floor, is a kind of common denominator that dancers can understand in other than the ballet world. They're dancing barefoot. Then this is the same thing on a permanent basis. It's called a harlequin floor. But basically, it's the obvious thing about a dance floor is that the structure of the floor needs to be flexible, what's commonly called a sprung floor, so that people can leap for hours on end and not get permanent injuries to the body.
Easier on the knees.
It's easier on the knees. It's easier on all the bones. But if you're not involved in the dance world, you might not understand that not slipping, or at least understanding the grip characteristics of the surface of the floor itself, is just as important, because a dancer has to know what to expect when they leap and land, or when they go into a turn. If the floor has unexpectedly slippery characteristics or grippy characteristics, they can be very, very, very dangerous to people dancing in contemporary dance. But notice also the shape of the room, and the fact that it was built with a minimal grid around the perimeter. But this is the first place where I get a chance to point out an expression of that flexibility. So if you look up above, in plain sight is a cable tray. It's the first place that we've actually seen it this clearly, so I can point it out in here. Everything on the technical side of the room is wired together right out there in the open. And even in places where you don't see that, like the lobby or the O'Dane Gallery, it's merely hidden by the ceiling structure, because after being in the SFU theater for decades, it was a really high priority to be able to change the wiring and change the layout of the equipment. And most every space, including the studio spaces, has that. There is another dance studio, but I think at the moment we'll skip it. It's behind this lounge-ish space, and but this again is a deliberate. There's a hangout space, a student space that is built right in the pathway from other spaces. And the other spaces in this case are, first of all, the dance space there, but also around this corner to the left is a small screening room, fully capable of surround sound and having quite actually, so it's a little 30-seat screening room, and it has a fairly high quality projection system, video projection system, not film, but and the screen is hidden behind up above this sound layer, and so this is in essence a film space, film studies space. Other students than dancers are tucked down here in this corner, and they're likely to come out of class and bump right into whole groups of dance students that have simply just finished a studio class. Also quite deliberate setup. This is another space like that one, but originally set up as a completely flexible space, and now being used, in fact, as a music space, as a resident ensemble year by year lives and works in this space, and they're the people that play student compositions. So again, it started out with one purpose, namely to be a film space that wasn't with seats, and it's been repurposed because it's designed to be repurposed for a more pressing need at that point. So, this is an electroacoustic music studio. It's largely used by faculty and graduate students. And if you knew what you were looking at, you would realize this is kind of a museum for analog and digital synthesis. This is Arnie Eigenfeld's computer-played marimba gear. There's a disc clavier, which is like a diskette vintage player piano. And then there's some very, very interesting and quite old synthesizers from the early days of electroacoustic music. And a lot of the very basic principles in digital synthesis were actually developed at universities and quite a few of them here at Simon Fraser. But so this is an electroacoustic studio. And then,
let's just have a quick look here for these ones.
Okay. Yeah, here's some more of the synthesizers. This is a keyboard for a Moog synthesizer. They're just, it's an astonishing collection of gear. And then, of course, these strange, what we think of as the dominoes are sound absorption. Now, here's another one of the spaces that you have when you have to reconfigure your building. So what was originally conceived of as a rectangular space now takes on this non-parallel walls, and you have to rework things. In this case, it's been turned to an advantage in that the one thing you would rather not have in a music facility is parallel reflective surfaces, and here it is. So this is a principal teaching space for music. As you can see, all this gear that's been here since COVID. And then I earlier on mentioned that there is a place where you can't get to in a wheelchair, but it's quite minimal. That's it up there, that there's a series of not very large practice rooms up above there. And that's a space that's only accessible from through a staircase, but still in all, that's pretty good for one of these things. Okay, so now we've done dance, we've done a little bit of film, we've passed into some music spaces. Okay, so now coming out of that music space we were just in, and here's the staircase I was talking about up to the small series of practice rooms here. But I'd like to point out a couple of interesting things about this space, and this is a good place to do it. There's an elevator here that has no buttons, no controls. It's actually a good indication of how integrated this building is, because this is in fact not our elevator. This is the elevator for the Portland Hotel Society single residence occupancy building on the roof of this building. And the only reason it's here is because in any building like this, there has to be access to all levels for firefighters. And so the only way these doors would ever open is under control of firemen. But sometimes students have been here for years and they have no idea why this elevator is here. And that also goes for this space, where I've talked to students who've been here studying music and coming and going out of those doors who just simply don't know what's in here. And so here's a space that some groups of students are very familiar with and others just don't know why it's here at all, or even that it is here. And this is an intriguing space. Its most important characteristic is revealed if we don't make any noise at all. it's a film soundstage. It's in fact an incredibly strong part of the structure because more or less in the center of the room is the corner of the Portland Hotel Society apartment section of this building. And then inside of that is a completely isolated concrete box. The floor is on shock absorbers. It's as level as it can be without going to a level of expense that we couldn't afford. And every single thing passing through the walls and the ceiling is isolated for sound. So it was originally intended to be used for sync sound for film shoots. It still is to some extent. But ironically, this particular program hasn't actually done as much of that as we expected, so it now gets used for other things. It gets booked all the time for rehearsals and graduate projects and so on. It's also an interesting space because it's one of the spaces where we really had no control whatsoever about the dimensions, the height, the width, the length. And for the first year, it was largely unusable because the sound quality was absurdly bad. Every noise you made was followed by a loud pinging noise. And eventually, in desperation, for lack of a better thing to try, 4 inches of acoustic high-density fiberglass was put all over the ceiling, and that solved the problem. But so here's a film space now. And people are in here working and doing film or these other projects I mentioned, and then dancers and musicians are passing by as well. Also, pretty much a deliberate idea. This is a space, a fairly sizable space right in the middle of the building. And again, it's like one discipline nestled in the middle of the others. Couple of seminar rooms here, and we're continuing in a more or less circular fashion. In ordinary times, this would be packed with students. It's got a small kitchenette, and a lot of people are here for extended periods of time into the evening, and they'll make something to eat or just hang out here on breaks from rehearsals and classes and so on. And the one discipline that we haven't seen so far is housed here. There are 2 teaching spaces for theater performance. One here, and curiously enough, unlike the dance students, the theater students refer to these by the numbers. So instead of it being Courtyard or Hastings or Blonde or Maple, this one is 4270, and its partner is 4210. It's been reconfigured, not reconfigured as much as surfaces have been added, a little bit of acoustic treatment, but primarily these wall surfaces that are a lot less vulnerable than the original drywall surfaces were, and that are designed so that people can tape things up. There's 2 studios like this. We'll drift quickly into the other one in a minute. It's interesting because this size of a facility was very much important to the original people in the credit program who taught theater here, Mark Diamond, Penelope Stella. They wanted, because of the way their training worked, they wanted large space that they could subdivide rather than small spaces. And so this was what ended up being their outcome. We have 2 very large teaching spaces. Now, try to remember what this looks like in a few minutes, because it's important that it is like this. One of them, 4270, has these windows in the end and is comparatively longer and narrower because of the structure of the building, in fact, and where the actual HVAC systems are and things like that. It has, again, even after 10 years of being here, still a very minimal perimeter grid, just basically a pipe around the outside. And it has some storage capability behind this wall here. Whereas the other one that we're going to go to next, storage in here as well. The other one that we're going to next is similar, but not exactly the same. So here's 4210, no windows. Otherwise, a very similar space. Now, it's probably obvious that the dance teaching studios would have a movement floor. What's unusual about this building is that almost without exception, every large space has a complete movement floor from wall to wall to wall to wall. And so that was very, very deliberate, and it's about flexible use of the space. So this has a movement floor, a sprung floor. It's not the sort of traditional basket weave floor. It's a proprietary floor system developed by J. Gower Taylor. It has, but it's basically a floor with various types of padding, and every single one of these floors has to some extent been customized. So the dance studios are the most flexible, the theater studios slightly stiffer, and when we get to the other studios, I'll tell you about that. But the entire space is a movement floor. And this studio, there's some irony for me personally here in that we built very sophisticated and well-equipped venues. And then having done that, as we occupied the building, realized that what we didn't have was a simply equipped, easy to operate, basically equipped studio that anybody without a year or 2 or 3 of training as a production and design technician could actually operate without sending the lighting system or the sound system into oblivion. And so we've actually had to come in and take this room and build a more or less simple system with quite limited resources and using initially some pretty old equipment and then redistributing some equipment. And so, and then we've had some people program graphic interface systems that anybody could operate with a little bit of orientation. And so this is now, from my point of view, ironically, almost the analog for the studio made out of Confederation celebration trailers up on the hill. Right. There you go.
Right now we're on the top floor, correct?
Yes, this is
technically floor 4.
Yeah.
But in total it's
floor 6. And so floor 4, the 6th level, is more or less a single level floor. And you remember I said earlier on that B2, B1, and G, for reasons that aren't quite as obvious yet as they will be, they're a closely connected, integrated set of floors. We're now going to go down to 2 and 3, and half of these floors are double height spaces, and the other half are single height floors with offices and small labs and so on. I come in on the top level of Studio T&D. Okay, so we are walking down from the 6th floor, aka level 4, down to level 3. And when we go out into this floor, you're going to see quite graphically what I was talking about of the integration of the floors. So we're now on level 3. We're outside of the cinema in the closest thing to a lobby that the cinema has. And this is the bottom side of level 4. We're on level 3, and that's level 2. And so this is a perfect example of the double level. It has some surprising consequences in that this hallway on level 4 is acoustically integrated with the exact thing underneath on level 2. And people don't always realize that, and there have been some quite funny incidents of people walking on this level and saying things that were then overheard by people on the level below. We're going to go into the next 2 spaces from the technician's point of view. So, I don't even know where it is. Come on in. Here is the technician's point of view on Studio D. So we're directly below 4270. And that's why I asked you to try to remember what 4270 looked like.
That's the room with the window upstairs.
That's the room with the window upstairs, because it's exactly the same footprint as this studio, which in fact is 2270, but is almost always called Studio D. And that's because of the placeholder name that was given while we hoped for somebody to donate funding and put their name on the studio. But the important thing is the designers of the building realized that if they stacked 4270 on top of 2270, that you would have a built-in rehearsal capability for rehearsing an event that would be transferred to this venue down below. And regardless of what kind of configuration you were in, you could essentially duplicate it in a rehearsal hall, which is quite a major asset. From up here, you can see that the seating in this space is set up entirely with modular platforming and rails, the same ones we saw down below. And it has, therefore, no fixed configuration. And I'll talk about that a bit more when they go down below. But so this is the technical ledge for Studio D. And then if we literally walk around the corner, you'll see that D and T, the other studio, are essentially a matched set. So here we are, we don't have the lights on down below, but now we're on the tech level of Studio T, and this is the same footprint as the teaching studio on the floor above, which was 4710. This is 4210. This is 2210. So that's one of the major assets in the building. So let's go downstairs and inside, and then we can talk about a couple more things. We're walking by the cultural unit, which is the technical support part of the part of the building that is actually not part of the School for Contemporary Arts, but part of the university under the External Affairs VP that handles things like the partnerships with cultural organizations and supports rental events and so on. And they also work with us, but that's their office is quite nearby ours. And now this is where we were looking from above. So this is Studio T. Sorry, you're right. This is Studio D. And there's a lot of things I could mention about this that are very, very deliberate choices. So first of all, this room is set up. It has seating in a proscenium or front end stage configuration, but all this seating is completely modular and replaceable. So just if we come over here and look underneath, you can see it's just those components we saw in the lower hallway. They're all reconfigurable. We can set them up in almost any configuration that you can imagine. So the seating is completely flexible. This floor is that same movement structure. But what's particularly fascinating is that this space, Studio D, is right on top of the O'Dane Gallery and the lobby. Studio D, where we're going next, is also
Studio T.
Studio T, where we're going next, is also on top of the lobby. More impressively, the cinema is on top of the biggest venue in the building. And this is where a lot of the money was invested to make this possible. So these large stacked spaces are not only on movement floors, they're actually also on jacked up floor slabs. So what happened was the building was designed and constructed with the concrete structure, had depressions the size of this room. When it had cured and was strong enough, they came in, they laid, in essence, a plastic sheet all over everything. They put special jack-up shock absorbers, and then they put structural steel, rebar, this whole room, and then they poured a 4-inch thick concrete slab. When that's set up, and I saw this, it was remarkable. A crew of people came in, maybe 6 of them, and they spent a day with gigantic screwdrivers walking down the room, stepping a meter at a time and doing a quarter turn, next one, a quarter turn, next one, a quarter turn, and they lifted the floor slab 2 inches off of the structural concrete. So it's a floating floor on a jack-up slab. So you can have 30 dancers pounding across a floor like this, and you might be aware of them downstairs, but you can actually continue to teach and live and enjoy an exhibition. That's the same way that the cinema can sit on top of the Wong, and so on. So it's one of the most expensive aspects of the building by square foot, but it's what makes it possible to have this integrated structure all in one facility like this. Not something you would necessarily choose to do, but it has made this structure work for us because we have all of these things that actually we think of as being integrated are in the same physical building. They're not spread across a campus, and it makes a huge difference. While we're looking around in this room, if Vlad looks up at the ceiling, you're going to see that the lighting and sound system is on a grid, pipe grid. It's more or less everywhere 2 meters by 2 meters, this grid. And unlike many theaters, it's not biased towards any expectation that you're going to use the room in a particular way. In other words, you know, if you're always going to have the stage over here in this corner, then you can design your grid structure or your catwalks or however you're going to work your overhead spaces. You can design them to be easily worked and efficient, but then you're committing to that. So the SFU Theater up on the Burnaby campus was that in spades. It was a theater that had not only retrofitted catwalks above a hung ceiling, but you had to literally lie on the catwalk and work the lighting and the sound equipment and not be able to see the stage. So this is very much a reflection of opting for flexibility. It also explains why we have so many personnel lifts and ladders and things like that. But once again, it's a commitment towards flexible staging and flexible use of these rooms. Okay. Ready?
Yep.
So this is the pair to Studio D. This is Studio T. It's the same footprint as 4210 on the 4th floor. And what you're looking at the moment is videotaping configuration. But in fact, this is the configuration that was used for the last school production before COVID-19 changed things for the spring. And so this is the same kind of a room, the exact same kind of room in terms of functionality as Studio D, only in a stripped out configuration. And I've always found it ironic that when we were looking for placeholder names, this one was called T for theater and that one was called D for dance, mostly because we assumed, oh, rectangular space, has windows, probably more likely to be dance-ish or used for dance. More square space, no windows, functionally the same, but it should be T for theater. So that one has a gray Harlequin ballet floor surface. This one has a linoleum surface. They're otherwise functionally the same.
Yeah.
In
You want to open the curtain so that we can see the rest of the space?
Yeah, I can try. In 2010, in the summer of 2010, after the Olympic Festival, whoops, I guess I can't. In 2010, in the summer after the Olympic Festival, the first faculty productions were done in these spaces, and the first production in Studio D was a theater production, and the first production in here in Studio T was a dance production. So I guess that does go to show that we made interchangeable spaces.
We're on floor 3 right now?
Yeah, we're on floor 3 right now, and we're going to go inside the Javad Mofagian cinema. We're going to just take a quick look in from the upper level here. So this is another major facility in the building. This is a combined cinema lecture hall. Most of what you see in the way of equipment, visible equipment, is actually the lecture system. And there's a completely separate cinema sound system behind the walls. So here we are down on the small stage in the cinema, and it always amazes me, frankly, looking from this side of the room, you realize that it probably does have, as it said, 360 plus seats, although it never quite seems that way from up above. It has the ability to project films in all formats, from 8 millimeter, 16 millimeter, Super 8, et cetera, in the sense that these curtains on the screen can reformat to fit the ratios, the aspect ratios. But it's one of the last remaining places in Vancouver where you can actually show a full-length feature film. Not done all that much anymore. Most everything is distributed on video. But this room is constantly in use for everything from the Latin American Film Festival to the Vancouver International Film Festival, plus large-scale classes and so on, and also often used for rental events that the university's organization makes money off of, to be blunt. It's got amazingly good sound system in here, the equivalent of any Cinematheque around. And also, the ventilation is superb. So all of the actual airflow is coming in through huge ducts and this plenum under the seats very slowly and being drawn off very slowly. So it's quite a decent cinema, and it gets a great deal of use. Okay, so we've now come down to floor 2, and we're in the part of the building where floor 2 is separated from floor 3. So it's an office level, and in fact, it's the production and design office level, or at least the portion of offices that are production and design offices, and also behind us, the offices of the technical people in the Woodward's cultural unit, the people that are responsible for a lot of the technical support in the building, equipment maintenance, venue maintenance, and in a normal year, all of the events that are not produced by the School for Contemporary Arts directly, such as partnerships with the Push Festival and. It's also got a proximity to another one of these double height chunks of 2-3. So this is conceived of as the digital core of the teaching part of the facility. Most of the disciplines in the School for Contemporary Arts are now using digital technology, whether we're talking about electroacoustic music or dance choreography, production and design, obviously writing of any kind. And so rather than have separate facilities in every discipline, we conceived this as a kind of a core. So, for example, this entire space here has, as does the whole building, amazing wireless coverage, but it also has power. So students with their laptops come and hang out here and work side by side and together. In fact, while I think about it, when we were designing this facility and trying to specify the equipment in it, it's the time in my career where more technologies were changing than ever before. Didn't matter what you talked about, whether you talked about lighting control, sound recording, film, you name it. It was on the cusp of major transformation, and nobody could really say which way it was going. So we have a lot of systems in the building, like microphone lines running everywhere in venues. And if you're doing something like amplification for a band, what you're mostly doing now is putting a stage box down with the band, plugging all the mics into it, and then running a couple of computer cables to the console or to the amp racks or something like that. So we couldn't really predict what was going to happen. And also we knew that we could buy state-of-the-art equipment in 2008, and in 2004, the students would be going to Costco and buying a more powerful computer for less money. What we could do, though, is equip the space for great places to work, large displays, and also make it as flexible as we possibly could. So here's a space that has no particular computers in it at all, but it has a great place to work with power. Here's a teaching space back here that is a lot of little rooms, and they are equipped with nothing particularly permanently built in, but they have good acoustic treatment and they're flexible. And then there's a whole set of just decent workspaces like that in a variety of size ranges. And then here's a space for teaching electroacoustic music, and now it's set up at this point for a small number of people to work, but at other times of the year it would be set up for a class. So it's got good acoustics, it's got a flexible 8-channel sound system, it's got the ability to be reconfigured, and not a whole lot of it is reflecting any permanent commitment about how this space should be set up. And if we come out this way, we're back to the upper level of this space here. On the lower level of this digital commons, I guess we can call it, There were originally 2 standard university computer labs that could be booked for a variety of things. And if they weren't being used for a class, then they could be used for whatever students needed computer support. So this digital media commons was originally set up with 2 standard SFU computer labs. They could be booked for they could be booked for classes. They could be used individually by students when they weren't booked for classes. There were 2 of them. To our great delight, this one, which is currently just being used to reconfigure equipment, but this became the first ever home for production and design, and several years ago, or 2 or 3 years ago. And so this is now where a lot of meetings, some of the smaller production classes, and a lot of the work happens out of this room here. So that's the kind of digital core of the building for the teaching production side. So we're now on the ground floor. And if you remember that from before, what we saw on the ground floor was the O'Dane gallery. Here it is. And the lobby. And at that point, I pointed out that you're not seeing a lot of the ground floor. Because here is a missing part. It is the technical level of the Fay and Milton Wong Experimental Theater. So what you're looking at here is the missing part of the ground floor. It's an extremely well-equipped facility. The same kinds of considerations were at play here: flexibility, a lack of commitment to any particular use of it. That's probably not as obvious at the moment because our relatively recently acquired motorized seating system, which is all the reddish colored seats, is currently deployed in an end stage, or really in this case a proscenium configuration. So it looks like what you expect for a large theater like this. However, all the seating on the balconies is platform seating. The overhead grid is relatively unbiased. And when the seating is fully retracted, it goes right back almost entirely under the balcony. And we have, in the 10 years we've been using this facility, done configurations where anything you can imagine has occurred, up to and including seating on what you would think of as being the stage out there where you're seeing the black floor. And that's where we had seating for a number of productions. And all of the performance was in this very large part of the room. Moreover, these what look like lighting bridges, if you're from other facilities and you've seen them before, they're not fixed. They actually are motorized, and they can track back and forth all the way from the proscenium wall back to where we are here. And that's in fact how you work this overhead lighting grid. It's an interesting setup. It has some advantages and some disadvantages. We at one point considered what's called a trampoline grid. They weren't common. We were anxious about whether, we could teach with that. I think if we had designed the theater a few years later, we would have probably gone with the trampoline grid, because a trampoline grid is basically a stainless steel net stretched over the entire opening, and you go out and walk around and you work the lighting and the sound from above this net. They're common now, or more common. They have been in existence for decades. I think the original one is an Eisenhower design at Yale, right?
Yeah, laboratory.
Yeah. And so it's just kind of a fluke that we went this way. On the other hand, we can and have done some pretty astonishing things where we've moved entire bridges worth of lighting and reconfigured it in half an hour. And you can't do that with a trampoline grid. Mm-hmm. But every theater has its strengths and its weaknesses. We always thought this space, let's walk while we talk. We always thought this space would have pretty decent acoustics. Turns out it has an excellent acoustics, at least the main part of the room. It has the volumes and the ability to dampen the hard surfaces with drapes and so on. Have meant that it's got great acoustics, and or at least can be configured to have great acoustics for different types of performances. Now we're on a level which is we think of as the balcony level, but really we're on B1, right? If you think about it, outside of this it's B1. In here it's the balcony level. This is a level that can be either audience or technical and performer, whereas the one we just came from, audience is never up there, and it's not set up to be safe for the public, so they're never up there during any kind of performance. But this new seating system has left us with a little, just shy of 400 seats. During the Olympics, we had 500 seats crammed in here, and it just was way too many. This gives us comfortable and excellent seating, but it also explains why you're not going to run performances here at a profit. You're not bringing in large expensive shows expecting to recoup your costs and make a profit on it. It's simply too small. And then the space that you can now get a sense of, what we call the assembly space, what looks like the stage in this particular configuration, that's really underneath the lobby. And that's it's possible to divide off that space from this space. So what is behind this lighting truss that's on winches, those gray panels are actually a guillotine door that can be brought down to cut the spaces in half, either to isolate this space acoustically from that space, which changes its qualities, or we've even used it in a number of shows, in particular the one where we had the audience out there and the performers taking up this much of the space, kind of a strange reversal of the norm. But so the assembly space at the moment is set up looking very much like a proscenium theater stage, and this is set up looking like the front of house for a standard large or medium-sized theater. But it has not by any means always been used that way. Let's go down one more level, and we'll talk about some of the other considerations. The SFU Theater up on Burnaby Mountain that had a ventilation system, heating and ventilating HVAC system that was so loud that we would run it full bore while the audience was coming in and then shut it off until intermission. Somebody would go downstairs, turn it on again to try to get control of the temperature and the HVAC or whatever was required, and then turn it off again to start the performance. This system in here is running. All of these large grills like this are intakes into the room from what's called a displacement ventilation system. So I can barely feel the air coming in where I'm standing. It's coming in huge volumes and very slowly, and it's being drawn off slowly at the top of the theater. One of my favorite memories of the early times here in 2011 or so was when one of our faculty members who was used to the SFU theater told me that we had absolutely failed in this regard because the fans were driving her crazy and we'd have to shut down the ventilation system. And I had the delightful experience of telling her that she would have to speak to my colleague, the lighting designer, because what she was hearing was the fans on the computer-controlled lighting equipment, and that if he would use less of them, the room would be dead quiet. So that's been great. Again, this is a huge space. It's a huge space. It goes all the way back. You're barely aware of it now, but where you see the wall and the exit sign there, that is the parallel with the front edge of the balcony on the end. From the actual end underneath the balcony, from this wall to the brick wall on the other side, and all the way back to behind the cyclorama, the entire space is a movement floor, the entire space. It's the stiffest movement floor in the building because Jay designed it to handle seating loads for an extended period of time, but it's still a place where movement theater, dance can be done in every corner of the room. So it's interesting, you know, with all this expertise available and a lot of time to think, this, like every other theater I know, has missed something quite intriguingly obvious in retrospect, and that is we do a tremendous amount of dance. And we thought we had figured it all out. And then as we began to use the space, we realized that if that's being considered the stage, which is also ironic because originally the assembly space prior to the design charrette and reconfiguration, it actually wasn't there. It wasn't attached to the main room. It got there in the design charrette, and it was almost a separate studio to the extent where people came in and looked at it and went, well, why do you have a sound and light lock downstage right on stage? And we went, well, it's not the stage. And they went, well, you may not think it's the stage, but nobody, whoever uses the theater in a normal configuration or the most common configuration, would think of that because it's a stage. And we went, oh my goodness, and we removed the sound and light lock in the corner. However, if that's the stage, then a crucial lighting position is to center stage. And over and over and over again, we found out that no matter where you put the lighting bridges, and no matter how you compromised between the audio setup and the lighting setup, we were missing a key position for lighting. And however, as part of the equipment, we'd actually gotten 3 winches, and most of what we needed, and with some very clever purchasing by one of our technical people, we installed the only component of the lighting system that can actually be lowered to the floor in a way that you would in a fly loft theater. And that way we can create a position for lighting and sound that works to the center of the stage. So in our theater, that's the big one that we didn't quite figure out, but we were able to deal with it. So for the moment, this is the stage. So here we are on stage. You can see the intakes from the the HVAC system. You get some sense of the kind of connectivity that's built into this venue when you see one of, 20 odd panels that are around the room like this. There's panels which are in fact removable here, and all the wiring and everything is running in those. Who knows if we'll ever actually need to rewire. Masses of cabling are running in cable trays overhead, and you can see it probably with better lighting over here. And again, it's all thought of to the best of anybody's ability in about 2006-ish, 2004 to 2006. And guess what? Almost everything changed dramatically. A lot of lighting equipment transitioned to LED lighting. Dimmers became less central than constant power, and intelligent fixtures that are capable of doing their own dimming and many other things beside became more and more affordable and more common. And so we have semi-permanent power running all over the place, but it's not a big deal because there's a lot of available power here. And although it's here and in fact up on the corner of the tech ledge, it's not necessarily as pretty as it would be if we were able to do it over again. But it's, again, great that we designed the facility with an eye to being able to modify it. This is the one place in any of our facilities where we have a removable floor, replaceable floor actually. So this is the same structural system, but instead of a vinyl floor or a Harlequin dance floor or a linoleum floor, we have simply a quarter-inch hardboard stapled down, and we can, when it's just, we will go to the last, we'll go to the last 2 facilities quickly. Here we are at the other end of the lobby. And this is interesting to me because this is the wood shop. It's compact. It may not look like it to you now that it's completely filled with storage gear thanks to the epidemic or the pandemic. But it's not big by any means as far as theater shops go. And once again, it reflects the kind of compromises that were at work. What you were looking at here is intriguing because this is a lot of our hardware. And I'm quite fond of this set of cabinets because what it is half of the card catalog from the SFU Theater when they went digital many, many years ago. So we have a lot of gear in here and a lot of material, and there'll be an opportunity to talk about that in some detail. However, there were arguments that were for bigger production building facilities, and there were even people that advocated that what I've been describing as the stage, which is technically called the assembly space, largely because it doesn't mean anything. There were people who said, well, that should be the scene shop. And it can be. It doesn't have dust collection equipment and things like that, but there have been many times in 10 years where we have built things or finalized the construction of things on stage, but at least we're not committed to it permanently and in a way that we can't use it for performance. So this is the wood shop. Last of our facilities are in the other part of the backstage, quote unquote. So most of the facilities here are things like catering for events and communications rooms for IT equipment and so on. This is our version of props and costumes. It's not by any means extravagant. It reflects our history. It reflects a focus of this program as opposed to programs that do have extensive training in costume and so on. And interestingly enough, from my point of view, it reflects in a very curious way the configuration of the Simon Fraser University Theater on Burnaby Mountain. Because if you look that theater up, it's essentially configured like a Greek amphitheater. The seating was very wide and surrounded a half-round thrust part of the stage, and consequently, any audience configuration you could imagine could see into the backstage and into the sides. And so we never really built box sets. We never really built like large walls that would block people's vision from strange parts of the seating.